This video focuses on another aspect of analyzing your audience. I'll discuss 3 ways of categorizing the writer-reader relationship within professional contexts. In the other video on analyzing audience, I focused on the audience's connection to the message itself. In this video, I focus on the other side of the rhetorical triangle. The arrow here shows that one side of the triangle connects the audience with the writer. In other words, we're talking about relationships. I'll continue to use a passage from a policies and procedures manual that I've used in other videos to teach you principles for analyzing audience when you communicate in writing. The first of the 3 categories describes differences in values between the writer and the audience. Cross-cultural research tells us that certain dimensions are useful ways of characterizing cultural similarities and differences. I'll rely mostly here on the work of Michael Minkov, who's extended the work of Geert Hofstede. I'll refer to national cultures, but the dimensions are also useful for characterizing other social units. Almost all research supports the use of one dimension, that described as individualism versus collectivism. It's the dominant characteristic for comparing cultures. Individualism describes a culture in which people are expected to have the freedom to act as they wish. That is, as long as they don't harm others. Children are taught to be assertive and to accept conflict as a natural thing. In addition, regardless of group affiliation, everyone's thought to have some universal rights. Collectivism describes a culture in which people are expected to conserve tradition. Children are taught to submit and avoid conflict. It's especially true when dealing with a person in power. Also, those who do not belong to the in-group are typically excluded without an apology. Minkov's work established one other dimension of importance, monumentalism versus flexibility. Monumentalism describes a culture in which people are expected to be genuine and self-consistent. Children are taught to be true to themselves and express their emotions. They're encouraged to rely on help from others and to pool their resources together. Flexibility describes a culture in which people are expected to show self-control and delay gratification. Children are taught to be thrifty and hide negative feelings. They're also taught to be self-reliant. This image is called the Minkov-Hofstede map of the world. The principles I've introduced help explain cultural differences, for example, between Northern European Anglo culture, which most values individualism, and African cultures, which most value collectivism. How might this difference in values play out in the workplace? Imagine a supervisor emails 2 subordinates, saying, "Let me know how much time you need to complete the project." The subordinate from Sweden probably responds favorably. She likes being permitted to figure out the schedule for herself. She responds positively to being treated as an individual and equal by her boss. But the Nigerian subordinate is likely unhappy because his culture values collectivism. He wants to avoid suggesting a schedule that his boss will not approve. That would mean an unwanted conflict. The Nigerian subordinate may perceive the boss as weak or incompetent. As for the other principles I introduced, consider a workplace situation in which differences between Latin American culture and East Asian culture create diverse audience responses to a message. Imagine that a project manager emails 2 of the managers at her company about a scheduled delay and doesn't provide specifics for the revised schedule. The manager from Japan may be upset because his native culture values self-sufficiency. So he doesn't want to ask the project manager to provide those specifics so he can do his job. But the manager from Colombia is relatively untroubled because her native culture encourages her to solicit help from the project manager. Although I've provided examples from the world map, the same dimensions can be used to describe regional, social, or organizational cultures. Analyzing potential value differences between the writer and the audience of a message helps predict whether the writer needs to consider a different perspective than their own. It's clearly easier to communicate with an audience when the writer shares their values. Sometimes the writer knows what an individual's values are and can take them into account when formulating a message. However, sometimes the writer has to address a less well-known or completely unknown audience. In that case, cultural values based on some knowledge of the audience's geographic, social, or organizational affiliations can provide clues to an unknown individual's values. That's the situation in the sample message we've been considering during the lectures on audience. So what can we say about power differences between the writer of the CRMP and the audience of contractors? Both parties have some power in this situation, although the contractors can only determine if they want to work with the government or not. If they do, they'll have to accept the policy in the writer's message. In some situations and organizational cultures, the customer is always right. That means writers have to carefully consider their reader's perspective and potential sensitivity to their message. Despite cultural differences in the degree of power one individual holds over another, all workplaces have power differentials. Internally, this is often represented by the org chart, showing what job roles supervise other roles. Power difference is the second category for analyzing the writer's relationship with readers. There are situations in which the writer has official power over the audience, for example, when the director of sales communicates with the sales representative. This is called a downward message, referring to the location of these individuals on an organizational chart. Second, there are reverse situations in which the audience has official power over the writer. When the director of sales communicates with the VP of marketing, for example, it's called an upward message. Finally, there are situations in which neither the writer nor audience has official power. This is called a lateral message, like when the director of sales communicates with the director of product. Writers need to consider power differences between them and their audience to predict how much cooperation they can expect from their readers, and how sensitive the readers may be to their message. For instance, it's one thing when the VP tells a director they're needed at a Saturday event. It's another when the director needs the VP at a Saturday event, especially if this is a unique rather than established situation. The third way of categorizing the writer-reader relationship within a professional context focuses on social distance. While power difference is based on professional roles, social distance is based on personal familiarity. The network diagram shown here is one way to display which individuals have connections with each other and how close those connections are. When sending an upward message to a supervisor, it makes a difference how well the writer and reader know each other. In fact, it's usually easier to write an effective message to a well-known enemy than to a stranger. The writer of the CRMP policy isn't likely to know any of the intended readers of the work stoppage message. The fact that readers are relatively unknown to a writer, that's a key challenge in this type of message. This is when audience research can be especially important. Nevertheless, analyzing potential social distance between the writer and the audience of a message helps predict how hard the writer must work to take the perspective of their audience. To summarize the main principles covered in this video, I introduced 3 categories of audience analysis dealing with what writers need to know about their relationship with their readers. First, writers need to know what, if any, values they hold that may be different from those of their audience. Second, they need to know what the power differential is between them and their audience. And third, writers need to know how much social distance separates them from their readers. The more differences and distance between the writer and the audience, the more important input from representative audience members becomes. More about that coming in another video lesson.